Cool. So hello everyone and welcome to this session where I'm going to discuss a use case related on the subject of messy and unwieldy looking data. So I'm going to be presenting the use case, which is how we can use Alteryx to consolidate your CRM system. Just before we get started, I'll just give you a bit of an introduction to myself. So my name is Ben Moss. I am a Tableau and Alteryx consultant for a Alteryx partner called the Information Lab, who are based in Europe, and I myself am based in Leicester. As a partner of Alteryx, we sell the product to customers, but we also offer a whole host of support services around those sales. So my typical day-to-day will involve working with a client to solve a business problem with Alteryx. It may also involve training people on how to use the Alteryx platform. And then finally, we also offer like a first port of call support desk for our customers. So if they have an issue with Alteryx or they feel like they found a bug, then we'll work through it before we then escalate that to Alteryx. My average week will consist of almost each one of those different things. In terms of my background, I have a background in sports analytics. So that's what I did my undergraduate and postgraduate degree in. And then from that, I moved into healthcare analytics because there's no money in sports analytics in the UK, at least. And then there was the same issue with healthcare analytics. So eventually I didn't sell my soul, but I took a career path with a potentially loftier salary. Not that I'm all about the money. On the screen, I've got three different images. So as I'm sure you're aware, or I hope you're aware, as this is an ACE session, I'm an Alteryx ACE. There's a picture of a baby, which may seem a bit weird, but that's because, sorry if you can hear my phone. Excuse me, just turn that off. So there's a picture of a baby on the screen. That's just to do with a bit of my background. So my great uncle invented IVF, or found IVF, or discovered IVF, however you want to put it. The picture of the atom is because my great-great-granddad founded the atom. So I've got quite a rich family heritage, but none of it seems to have passed down into my brain. I'm just a standard Joe, if you like. Didn't go to any fancy universities or anything like that. So today's agenda looks something like what you have in front of us. What we're going to be doing is focusing on how the fuzzy match tool in Alteryx allows us to solve that problem that I outlined at the beginning of the session. So we're going to understand the use case for implementing the fuzzy match tool. We'll look at what limitations that are associated with the fuzzy match tool. It's definitely not perfect. And we're also going to look at how we can understand the key components of the configuration with them. And for this session, we're actually going to get hands-on with a use case and a walkthrough, because I feel that's how I can best portray how Alteryx can be used to solve this business problem. If you want to solve or participate in today's session, there should have been a link sent round, and the link may also be in the Q&A, but the link for the content is till.bi/adapt-fuzzy, all in title case. But if you obviously, that's quite difficult to get just from me saying it, I'll put it on the screen just before we get hands-on to give you time to download it yourselves. So in terms of what fuzzy matching is, why we should use it, and the limitations, I'm just going to walk through this slide that we have in front of us. So fuzzy matching should be seen as a technique used to identify non-identical duplicate data entries using an array of text analysis techniques. And the reason I'm focusing on CRM data is because traditionally this is one of the biggest sectors that needs fuzzy matching. Personally, and I'm sure most of the audience is the same, when you fill in a web form, you don't fill in that web form in a consistent way. For example, my name is Benjamin Moss. Sometimes I'll put Benjamin, sometimes I'll put Ben. Sometimes I'll put my parents' address, sometimes I'll put my personal address. Sometimes I'll put my work email, sometimes I'll put my personal email. what this does for a company who's trying to decipher the data that they're getting is it makes it very difficult for them to understand truly who is Ben Moss and who or which of these contacts that I have for Ben Moss is actually the same person and which is actually someone else just called Ben Moss. So that's kind of the purpose for fuzzy matching. In terms of why, almost every analytical business challenge you face, you're going to be posed with some form of duplicate data. And a majority of those duplicate data points are going to be non-exact. So fuzzy matching is designed as an algorithm or a analytical methodology which allows us to detect those duplicates and deduplicate them. Now, in terms of limitations, this is something that I'm quite aware of because I've worked on a number of real life situations where I've had to use fuzzy matching in the recent past. So the one problem that you may find when using or implementing fuzzy matching within your business is the fact that the tool can be seen as a bit of a black box. It's difficult to understand truly why something is matching and why something isn't matching. So when you perform a fuzzy match in your head, you're going to have an idea of what you think should match and what you think shouldn't match. And when the results of the Alteryx workflow don't show what you see in your brain, it's quite hard to understand why that is, and then sort of reconfigure the fuzzy matching tool to get it how you want. In that kind of case, you may work with your business stakeholders to say, hey, maybe the fuzzy matching tool isn't actually the right thing to do here. Perhaps we can use Alteryx in a different way, which would be to build like a rule-based system for generating matches. So by that, I mean, you start just by trying to do a direct match between two records. You then use the data cleansing tool to remove punctuation and numbers and then trying to do the match. So you then do a third pass where you strip out white space, punctuation, numbers, maybe some keywords as well, and then you try and join the records. So building a step-based or rule-based algorithm like that rather than using this black box will potentially get better buy-in from your stakeholders because you can sort of say, if something doesn't match, you can clearly say, well, it doesn't do this, this, and this. So that's one sort of key limitation to the fuzzy matching tool. I would say the results are quite difficult to interpret sometimes. So this image or schematic that we have in front of us is essentially a guide to or an example of some problems that you may face when you're working with the Alteryx product. So we have, for example, in the first name field, the person is probably called Jonathan, but they've got a nickname John and they've got a second nickname Johnny. They also may have accidentally put a 0 instead of an O. They may have accidentally filled in the form incorrectly, so they've got their first name in the last name field. They may use different abbreviations of their address. They may leave fields empty. So this is just a sort of a really extreme example of the problems that can happen when you give people the ability to use free text data entry. So think of this as a worst case scenario. So as I said, this session is going to involve is largely going to be formed of me getting hands-on with the Alteryx product. So I'm going to come out of my slide deck now, and then I'm going to share my screen. I'll just bring up a quick link for those of you that want to follow along with me live. But if you don't worry, you can always come back to this recording or come back to the materials after the fact and potentially walk it through yourself. So don't worry too much, and I will probably go at a bit of a faster pace. So if you're not confident with following along, then just sit back, relax, and try and take in what I'm walking you through. So I'm just going to share my screen. And I'm going to quickly ask Tuvi if she can see the slide in front of me.
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So the link that you have in front of you is the link to the content that we need for today's session. So it's till.bi/adapt-fuzzy. It is a case-sensitive link as well. Now, if I were to copy that link into the browser, just open this one, till.bi/adapt-fuzzy. It will take you to this file share system, and then from there, you can download the zip file of the content that we'll be using for today's session. When you're working with files in Alteryx, it's really important that you extract the content from a zip file. So just make sure that you do that before you try and input any data or try and open a workflow or something like that. So just make sure you unzip the content as well. I'll just pop the link on the screen again for a few more seconds so people can just write that down so they can get it in the future. Cool. So in terms of the content that exists within this folder, we have the presentation from today's session. So if you think there's anything valuable within there, then please feel free to just take a look inside there. We've also got a solution workflow. So the process that we're going to build today, if you are unable to follow along, but you'd like to see the steps that we took and like to take home the steps we took, then the solution workflow is there for you to take. And then we have the starter workflow, which is sort of a guided thing, and that's what I'm going to work with today. I've got, just want to show you the input file that we're going to be working with, which I've called my CRM. So I'm just going to open this in Excel and show you the kind of information that we're working with. So we've got this simple or relatively simple data table. It contains information about people, where they live, their email address, and some potentially more sort of identifiable characteristics. So their credit card number and their passport number. So in a real world scenario, the only kind of company that's probably going to get this kind of information is something like an airline. And I may have worked with an airline in the past to do this use case. So at a super high level, this data set, I've purposely built in some duplicate individuals. So for example, we have Benjamin Chur and Ben Chur. They're probably the same person, considering they also have the same email address and a similar street address. We then have Carmen Brosman and Carmen Brosman. The differences between those individuals are the fact that they live at a different address and they have a different email. So that's potentially problematic or something to look at. And then there's a few more examples in there as well. I think there's sort of 3 or 4 records related to Daniel Geck. All of them have their own unique twist to it. So what we're going to do is deduplicate this data set so we end up with a smaller sample. And what that means is if I want to send a promotional black... Yes.
I'm sorry, can you share the link one more time? A few people are asking for it.
Sorry, there you go. So it's till.bi/adapt-fuzzy, and it is case sensitive, so you need to do all uppercase. Or we'll leave it up there for 30 seconds or so. So what that will do, if you navigate to that link, it will take you to a file share, and then from there you can download the content. Cool, I hope that was long enough. Again, if you haven't got the link or data, don't worry. It's not integral to this session. You can just sit back, relax, watch, and then potentially consume and build your own version of what we're going to go through today later on. Okay, so I just walked through this data set that we have in front of us. So as I was saying, the purpose is to deduplicate this data set for the sake of making sure that we don't spam individuals by emailing all of their different email addresses that we have, or sending flyers to each of their different addresses, even though they may not even live there anymore. So that's kind of one of the reasons, is to sort of deliver more accurate promotional activity. So I've closed that file, and then the final thing that I want you to show you that's in this input or this data file that I've shared is this Visual Steps Tableau workbook. And I'm going to sort of go through and use Tableau as a visual guide as to how the fuzzy matching process that we're going to build is working in Alteryx. And the first thing that I'm going to show you is this page, or this view, which is our seemingly unique 12 contacts that existed in that Excel file. At present, there is no relationship between any of these records. As far as my boss is concerned, we've got 12 people in our, or 12 contacts in our database. So that's sort of step one. This is our starting base. Now, within the Alteryx platform, what I'm going to do is open the starter workflow, which I've shared within that workflow. So let me just navigate and open that file. So starter workflow.yxmd. I'm going to open that file, and it's going to bring up this sort of documented workflow with just an input data tool on the canvas, which is the input data that I just shared with you. Now, the reason I create documentation when I'm doing training is for two reasons. One, it gives me a prompt about what I'm actually going to teach you. And two, from your perspective, what it means is once you've built the process, you've got a documented thing sort of detailing what you were trying to achieve at each step. So that's sort of why I have the structure rather than starting with a brand new clean workflow. So if there's any trainers in the group, then that's sort of my biggest hint or biggest tip. So if I were to run this workflow, you'll see, and then I view the output to our input data, you'll see our CRM database imported into Alteryx. Now, there's one issue or one thing that we don't have in our database at the moment, which is a unique contact ID. So what I'm going to do is use the record ID tool, which forms part of the preparation toolkit in Alteryx, to create that unique identifier for each individual in our database. This is something that you must have when you're using the fuzzy matching tool. You must have a unique identifier in your data. So let's bring on the record ID tool, and I'm just going to connect it to our input data. And I'm not going to change the configuration in any way. I'm quite happy to leave it with the settings that we have. I'll then just run the workflow again, just to make sure we're all happy with what that's going to give us. It's going to give us this unique identifying field on the left side of our CRM database table. So what I'm going to do is use the fuzzy matching tool several times to build out this sort of list of all of the people which I think are the same individual. And the reason I'm going to use several tools rather than just a single tool is I want to sort of build out this OR type statement. So let's say I think an individual must be the same person if their first name, last name, and email is similar, or their first name, last name, and credit card is similar, or their first name, last name, and street address, or their first name, last name, passport number. So I'm building out this sort of condition which will allow me to create this sort of tiered matching process. And that will make a lot more sense when I show you the visuals after we've actually completed the matching process. Now, in terms of where the fuzzy matching tool exists within the Alteryx product, it exists as part of the join category. which is the category which allows us to merge data sources together or merge values together. So because we're trying to merge records into one another, that's why it forms part of the join tool category. We can then bring the fuzzy matching tool onto our canvas, and we'll connect it to our unique or seemingly unique list of contacts. On the left side, we have the configuration options available with the fuzzy matching tool. So the first thing you must decide is whether you want to use what is known as purge mode or merge mode. In our use case, our contacts exist in a single data table, and I want to compare every individual within that table against every other individual within that table. If that's the use case you're looking at, then you want to be using purge mode. The other example is, or other option is merge mode. This is where you want to compare contacts in one data source against contacts with another data source, and then find the links between just those records. So you're not doing like an inter or intra review, you're doing a review against two separate sources. In terms of a real world use case for that, this is sort of similar to a project I'm working on right now for a client. They have a series of retailers and retailer addresses within their Salesforce data. They then have suppliers who tell them or give them information about who they have delivered their product to. And of course, the information that comes from the supplier is very different to the information that they have stored in their Salesforce database. So they want to merge those two separate data sources together, which is where, or an example of where you would use the merge mode. The next thing we must do on the left side is specify the field which contains our unique identifier or record ID field. So in our case, that's just the record ID field that we've created at the previous step. The really key thing here is where we want to specify what fields we want to match on. This may be a single field, or as it is in this case, it may be many fields. So what I'm going to do is specify and create a match between first name field, the last name field, and the email field, at least in this example. So what I'm going to do is from the drop-down list, select the first field that I want to match on. And I'm going to select first name. Once you select a field, you must specify what match type or match style you want to apply against the data within that field. Alteryx have created some presets which they believe sort of act as best examples of how you might want to match company names together, or address names, or names, or nicknames, or phone numbers, or zip codes, etc. So they're predefined styles from Alteryx, and they're seen to offer best practice. In this case, we're choosing the first name field, and first names obviously might also include nicknames. So what I'm going to do is select the name with nicknames option. Now, if you actually wanted to see how that match style was configured, what you would do is hit the edit button to the right side. So we can hit this little edit button. This will allow us to see how Alteryx have created that predefined profile for names with nicknames. So I'm going to hit edit. This brings up this panel in the middle of our screen, which is sort of an extension of the configuration window. Now, there's two phases to the fuzzy matching process when you're trying to match records together. The first thing Alteryx will look to do is generate keys between a record and all its other matching records. So this is designed, or this first process of generating keys is designed to narrow down the number of matches that Alteryx is going to create. Within the generate keys option, we then have the ability to select a specific algorithm in terms of how we want to generate our keys. If you hit the drop down, you can see those that we have available. What I would always recommend in Alteryx, if these things look a bit daunting, is just make sure that you make use of the help guide that Alteryx have available with you. Now, in our case, I read a blog article on the Alteryx community which says if you're doing name with nicknames, you actually don't want to generate keys. So we're going to set this to none. Just make sure you're following along that you set generate keys here to none. Once you've generated matches based on keys between two items, what Alteryx will then do is apply a match algorithm or function against that match to generate what is known as a match score. Again, you have like a whole set of options available to you. So you can look at the difference between words, the difference between characters, and the difference between words and digits. Now, again, I'd recommend reading the help guide for a bit more information about what each of these algorithms actually mean. But at a super high level, Levenstein is seen as quite a harsh algorithm, and it's unlikely that you will generate many matches. Whereas the gyro distance algorithm is a bit more lenient. So if you're thinking, oh, I'm not getting as many matches as I was anticipating, then you might want to look at using the gyro distance rather than the Levenstein distance. We're going to leave that as its default here. In terms of the nicknames, Alteryx has like a nickname table built into the product. So it will say like Ben is Benjamin, Nick is Nicholas, etc. And that option at the bottom is chosen because we chose that sort of preset nickname previously. If a match is created between Ben and Benjamin because of the nickname table, a penalty you might want to apply a penalty against that because it might not necessarily be correct. So in this case, if Ben were to match with Benjamin, it would score 85% because there was a 15% penalty caused by matching on a nickname. What you may want to do is adjust this match threshold, because at the moment it only allows for a penalty. It doesn't allow for a penalty and some misspelling within an individual's name. So I'm going to actually tone this down so it says 60. Just make sure you adjust that if you're following along. Now, I'm going to be applying this same thing on repeat with each of the fuzzy match tools that I bring onto the canvas. So I'm actually going to save this as sort of a preset. So I'm going to call this my nickname method. But when we hit OK, that's going to save as a sort of preset match style, which we can select from when we bring on the fuzzy match tool in the future. So that's just a little tip that we have, or option that we have available. And now this is actually the first time I've ever tried that, so I hope it works. So it's just give me a warning. So yes, I do want to save that profile. Okay. I'm not running as an administrator, so that might cause a problem. Okay. And Alteryx has been very kind to me there, and it's just adjusted my match style to zip code. So I'm going to have to change that very quickly again. So name with nicknames, edit, do not generate keys, and just tone that down to 60%. So actually we only made two sort of changes. What I'm then going to do is specify the fact that I want to match their first name and their last name and their email address. So I'm going to change I'm going to specify a second option, so last name. And with last name, I'm just going to use name. And I'm going to leave that with the predefined rules that Alteryx has given. The final one I'm going to do is email. So with email, I would expect the values to be exact. I wouldn't expect someone to misspell their email address, largely because of the fact that when you give your email address, they like to do some validation. So I'm going to change the match style here to exact. So what that means is if I've got Ben and Benjamin Moss, and they've got the same email, then they're going to be seen as the same individual. At the very bottom, there are some additional options that are designed to make our results a bit more visible. So you can see what keys Alteryx generated between the records that it's matched together. You can see the match score based on the match function that Alteryx has created between those two records. You can also output unmatched records. So if you want to keep all of your data, then that's an option that you should or could look at checking. Okay. Once we've configured that tool, it's time to just run our workflow and see what Alteryx is giving us. And the result we have is something like this. It's not overly helpful. It's telling us that this ID, so person number 6, is matching with person number 10. And the reason there's 2 records is because the records have matched against one another in slightly different ways. We also have, it looks like record 9 is similar to record 11, and record 3 is similar to record 5. If I quickly just look at the data going in, you'll see that record 3 and record 5 is that Benjamin and Ben share, where they have exactly the same email address. So these records have been matched together. In terms of visually understanding what that looks like, in Tableau, I've sort of created this chart, and you'll see the links. I created the links between those contacts of 5 and 3, 11 and 9, and 6 and 10. What I'm now going to do is use the fuzzy matching tool 3 more times and then merge the results together. So let's bring on the fuzzy matching tool again. And we're going to configure it in a slightly different style this time. So we've got to follow similar steps. So we still want to keep it in purge mode. We want to select our record ID field. I'm just going to zoom in a tab. And then we're going to do our customization. So I'm going to choose first name. I want to use the custom style. And I want to edit it. So let's change that. Actually, we want to use the name with nickname style, and then we want to edit it so it becomes custom. So no, I do not want to generate keys. I want to change the matching threshold to 60%. I then want to join on last name or fuzzy match on last name with the name methodology. And then with the street address, you'll see that we have a specific match style which is focused on address. So I'm going to choose address. Again, if you want to detail about what or how Alteryx have actually configured these styles, then all you have to do is select the edit button. And you can see how Alteryx have created that matching style, which they've termed address. So that's the second tool. The third tool, we're now going to look on first name and credit card number. So you may be thinking, why don't we just create matches on credit card numbers? Well, the fact is that myself and my partner have a joint account, we have the same card number, I believe, or maybe it doesn't work like that. Anyway, as a result, I'm going to look at the first name as well, because I don't want myself and my partner to be seen as the same content. So let's bring the fuzzy matching tool on again. Again, I'm going to connect it to our record ID tool, and then we're just going to quickly configure it this time. So record ID, first name with nicknames, and then just make sure you edit it. This is why saving the profile is quite useful. So no, I do not want to generate keys, and I'm going to bring the match threshold to 60%. With the credit card number, again, that's going to be something that's going to be exact. People aren't going to enter the wrong credit card number, otherwise the payment would be declined, and we probably wouldn't be therefore taking the data that they've entered. So we're going to choose credit card number and use the exact match style. With the final one, I'm simply going to match on the passport number. That is literally unique to every individual in the world. Within reason, maybe US might have some crossover with UK passport numbers, but for the sake of this exercise, we're just going to match solely on the passport number. So let's bring our record ID tool into our passport match box, choose record ID, and then passport number exact. If we were to then run our workflow, we'd get a whole set of different results. So record 1 and record 11 will have the same passport number. Record 2 and record 4 have a similar first name because I'm using a non-exact match style. They may have the same first name and the same credit card number. And then record 7 and record 10 have a similar first name, similar last name, and similar street address. What I want to do is union or merge all of these results together and then consolidate those into groups of contacts. So, but before I do that, I just want to show you sort of where we're at now in terms of what our results look like. So we performed our first pass, which was using first name, last name, and email address, and we have something that looks like this. For our second match, we only have one match, which is where record 7 matches with record 10. For our third match, where we're looking at first name and credit card number, you'll see that record 4 seems to be similar to record 2. And then finally, on passport number, we have the fact that record 1 equals record 11. Now, the reason this becomes really valuable is the fact that when we merge all of these results together, we end up with something like this. So record 1 matched with record 11 on the passport number, and record 9 matched with record 11 on, let me just find it, this would be the first one, on first name, last name, and email address. Therefore, we can proxy that record 9 is also the same as record 1. So these are all a unique individual, or likely to be a unique individual, I should say. There's no 100% accuracy with fuzzy matching. We then have a very similar situation with records 7, 10, and 6. So by applying those different conditions, we're sort of layering on the fact that this individual may be this individual and this other individual. Now, the way you create these groups of records in Alteryx is by using a tool called the Make Group tool. So we're going to start by using the union tool, which I'm going to drag onto my canvas. And then I'm going to connect each of our fuzzy match results to this union tool. And then the final step with our fuzzy matching workflow in terms of generating our results is to use this make group tool. So let's drag this onto the canvas and connect it to our union tool. And you'll see the configuration is quite simple. That's because the make group tool should always, or is largely only always used after the fuzzy matching tool. It's rarely used in other scenarios, but it can be useful in other scenarios. So we're going to select our first ID field and then our second ID field. And then I'm going to run our workflow. What the make group tool does is it indicates to me which fields or which records have been matched together into a single group. So record 1, 9, and 11 form one group. Records 2, 4 form a second group. Records 3 and 5 form a third group. Records 6, 7, and 10 form a fourth group. So there, essentially what we've done is converted 10 unique contacts into 4 contacts. So we've significantly reduced the size of our CRM database. The final thing you are really going to want to do is actually just give it a bit of a sense check, because these IDs actually mean nothing to me. So what I'm going to do is merge the IDs back with our original data, and then we can view the results and check that they do look about right. So let's bring on the join tool to our canvas. Let's connect our record ID output into our join tool, and we'll just merge them where the key field equals the record ID. So key equals record ID. And then we'll run our workflow. The final thing I'm going to want to do is just sort them in the order of that sort of group field we've created. So therefore, I have the records that are seen as the same individual together. So let's just drop a sort tool onto our canvas, connect it to our J anchor, and I'm going to sort on group ascending or descending, it doesn't matter. So sort the output results by group in ascending order. When you run the process, you'll see that we end up with the results as follows. So we've got this first group of individuals. You'll see every individual within this group has a different street address. One of them, for one of the records, we have a different email address, but they all seem to be that same individual, which is Carmen Grossman. We then have the similar example with our second record, our third record, and our sixth or fourth record. There are, of course, contacts in our data where no duplicates have been identified. So these records are still important. We're not going to want to remove those or lose those records from our database. So in a real-world scenario, we would then merge that data set in with our sort of group contact list. Now, that is a very simple, quick guide to how we can apply fuzzy matching in Alteryx. In a real-world scenario, there's going to be a couple of problems, shall we say. The first problem is going to be the quantity of data that you're working with. With one of the clients, they had 70 million unique individuals in their CRM database. The fuzzy matching tools are quite computer intensive when you're working with large amounts or large volumes of data. And that 70 million row database took about 24 hours to run through an Alteryx workflow. So if you're working with that volume of data, just kind of be, I'd say, quite aware. And as I say, the second limitation largely revolves around the fact that the fuzzy matching tool can be seen as a bit of a black box. It can be seen as difficult to interpret. So again, you may want to think about what's perhaps best for your organization Are they okay with the fact that they don't truly understand how the fuzzy matching tool works? Or do they want to create this rule-based system where they're a bit more in control of how you're bringing or merging records together? And with that, thank you for your time and thank you for joining today's session. I'm now just going to break back out of the screen share and into the Q&A in case people have any questions from today's session.
Ben, we had one question that says, when you match first name, you change the threshold via custom edit. How is this threshold different than the match threshold under the record ID field?
Okay, that's a really good question, actually. Something I probably should have covered as well. I'm going to share my screen to answer that question as well. So just bear with me 1 second. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough. So the question was, what's the difference between the match threshold here? That was a really badly drawn box. And the match threshold here, where it says 60%. So the match threshold given in this match window is specific to this field match. So first name against first name. So Ben against Benjamin. For those records to pass this match, they'll be given a score. That score would be like Ben matches with Benjamin, 85% or something like that. We then have a similar thing with the surname. So Moss versus Moss. That's going to give us a match score of 100% because they're exactly the same. So it's going to pass this match threshold. If we just simplify the problem, so I've scored 85% for my first name match and then 100% for my last name match. What Alteryx is going to do is sort of average those two scores out. So it's going to do 85 plus 100 is 185 divided by 2 gives us our total match score. And then it's going to compare that against our match threshold. So this is essentially a combination of all the rules. Does it still pass this match threshold? Because it's possible that I might score quite high for first name and last name and then really low for email, in which case we'd want to be booted out of the process, which is where this sort of match threshold comes in. Let me just think about if I've got anything more to say on that. Okay, so the thing that matters here as well is this match weight. So I didn't adjust the match weight. So by default, every rule we're applying or every field we're matching against is getting that even weight, which is why I do 1 plus the other divided by the number of sort of fields we're matching against. If you were to weight 1 at 20% and 1 at 100%, obviously you start getting different results, and or the way it calculates that match threshold gets a bit more complicated. But that's essentially how it's working. I hope that was a good answer.
Awesome. Another question from Kelly is there a standard to determine the percentage of match threshold? How to determine which field to use for fuzzy match?
Okay, so in terms of the match threshold, I think that's really up to the use case that you're working with. I would keep it quite high at first and then try and understand if kind of you're not getting enough results, and then think about how you could sort of reduce that threshold. And essentially when you reduce the threshold, you make your mechanism more lenient, but leniency doesn't necessarily mean you'll get better answers. And then the second part of that question is, how do we know what fields to fuzzy match on? Well, again, that really depends on your use case. In most use cases I come across, you're only going to have one field that you want to match against, which might be like something like you have a list of dog breeds and you want to do a fuzzy match between that list of dog breeds. So what essentially you need to do is say which of these fields contain varying characteristics, and what are my sort of key fields within our data set that should be seen as unique identifiers for an individual. I hope that made sense.
Another question is, when matching the first name, you chose not to generate new keys. Can you repeat the reason again? Why the name match style used for the last name, not using the generate none key?
Good question. The answer is because when I didn't change or adjust it, it didn't generate the matches that I was expecting. And then when I read the community help page for the fuzzy matching tool, it recommends that the name with nicknames logic, or when you're using a nicknames table, you shouldn't generate keys. I don't have the scientific reasoning behind that decision, but I can just tell you that it's indicated within the fuzzy matching documentation.
Would you delete the duplicates and keep just a unique row, or what would you do in a real world scenario?
Okay, so again, that's quite a good question. So I think that one's sort of best shown visually. So in the Tableau sort of output that I shared, in this case, we have the fact that contact 1 seems to be similar to contact 11, which seems to be similar to contact 9. You'll see that record 11 is the key contact here because he's linked to 1, or that contact is linked to 1, and that contact is linked to 9. So in this case, that might be one method in which you say, okay, record 11 should be the one I keep out of those 3 contacts. Something else that you might want to consider is it's likely in a CRM database that you have a field which says when that contact was generated. So if contact 1 has newer contact information than contact 11 or contact 9, then you'd probably want to keep contact 1 instead of contact 11. So again, I think that should be dealt with on a case-by-case case-by-case basis. But I'd sort of say, in terms of removing duplicates, you first need to determine which record you want to keep, and then it's a case of speaking to the team that own the CRM database to say, do we actually want to remove stuff, or shall we just create a separate sort of cleaner database which we want to start building? So you might not want to go all brute force and sort of remove information from your Salesforce. You may just want to create it. Is there any more to this?
Yes. Can we measure and show a metric on how strongly the records are correlated with each other?
Yes, you can. So at the bottom of the fuzzy match window, there are some options which talked about, one of them is let me just get the wording correct. So one of the options is output generated keys. So that will tell you the keys that match between the 2 records. And then the other one is the match score, which looks at the match function and will give you a score between 0 and 100 about how strong the match between those records is, or essentially how similar Ben is to Benjamin.
Next question is, how do you pick, the person before that said, thank you, got it. Next question is, how do you pick 11 and 10 to keep in the workflow?
Okay. I think I sort of covered that. So I'd be looking at again, it depends how you decide which record you want to keep, but then that might be sort of a manual basis. So I might create like a text input which listed the different records which I wanted to keep, and I join it against my data source. Or I might make it a bit more dynamic where I say which record is the key record, and then I'll do some joining. But unfortunately, I don't have time to show that today. It would take me a bit of time to build.
A question from Ali is, what was the reason we have 6 to 10 matched twice? And that was from way earlier on. It was just saved for later.
Yeah. So the reason is because it's due to the way in which Alteryx generates keys. So you can get 2 different keys generated for a pair of records. So say Ben matches with Benjamin, that's it might have matched once because of this set of keys, and then it may have matched again because of another set of keys. So that's why it can appear twice. On the sense of, or looking back at that answer, that just sounds quite fluffy. But what I'd recommend is just testing it out, and when you build your output, make sure you check show keys, and then hopefully that might make a bit more sense.
So we have a little bit less than 5 minutes left, a little bit less than 4, I'm sorry. We're out of questions, but I just wanted to say thank you. And all of this content will be available to watch again on demand, as well as the resources that Ben had. And Ben is on the community. So if you have any questions, please reach out.
Yes, I am. Thank you for everyone to joining, and also thank you to Tuvi for hosting and looking after me.
Oh gosh, we have one more last question before you go.
Okay.
How do you test your workflow before kicking off a 70 million record run?
Good question. You work on a sample of your data. So we essentially built the mechanism on a test basis. So we had 30 records, which included examples of where we would say it's undermatching, i.e. records that we believe should match together, and also examples where if there was overmatching, it would sort of match them together. Once we had built the process, we then sort of tested it against that set of records, so against that 30 subset. Once we were happy that it was matching everything as we wanted, then we unleashed it on the 70 million records. But we did have quite a bit of trouble with that, being brutally honest. It took us a couple of goes to prevent like the computer turning off and other things around that. But we got there eventually.
Great. Thank you, Ben.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tuvi, and thank you everyone for joining.